Today on Strong Women Podcast, we have the pleasure of talking with Yodit Brooks. And Yodit is a pastor's wife. She's been a pastor's wife for 24 years, and she's also been married for 24 years. So her husband started pastoring 3 months after they got married, and she loves the Lord. One thing that I really appreciate about Yodit is that she is very intentional about living faithfully in each day, walking with the Lord. And so I'm excited about unpacking her story for you all. But she's a mother of 6, and her oldest is in heaven. The age range now is 14 all the way down to 1. So she's a busy lady. And she has a real heart for kids in foster care and for adoption. As you're going to see more in her story, she has a lot more to say about adoption, but I'm going to leave that for our time with her. But I'm so grateful that you've taken this time to be with us, Yodit.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be with you guys today.
Okay, so Yodit, every time we have a guest that has an unusual, beautiful name, unusual to American ears, we love to ask the story of your name. So I want to hear your story of growing up, but tell us about your name first.
My name, thank you for asking that. My name Yodit is Ethiopian. My mom is Ethiopian, and very proud of our Ethiopian background. And it was actually the name of her best friend there in Ethiopia. So when she came here, she had a little girl and named her after her best friend back home. But Yodit is actually a very common name in Ethiopia, and it is the same name as the name Judith. And it derives from the Hebrew name Yehudit, which is daughter of Judah. And so, daughter of Judah or woman of Judah. And so that was it was great learning that. I didn't find out what my name meant actually until I was probably in my 30s. And yeah, so I knew it was Ethiopian and it was my mom's friend's name and all that, but I didn't know the meaning until much later. And interestingly enough, I was singing in a women's worship group called Women of Praise, and I found out my name meant woman of Judah or woman of praise. So
So then you renamed your band Yodit.
Exactly.
Well, I loved hearing that because, see, that already tells us a little bit about your story, and it is such a beautiful name. So, so your mom, was she a part of the church in Ethiopia? Was she a Christian?
My mom she grew up in the Coptic church in Ethiopia. And so the kind of ancient church there. But she wouldn't have considered herself back home. She came here as a teenager. She was 17 when she came to the U.S. And so she would joke often about being, in the church ceremonies. And there's a lot of times where they're doing prayers, and she'd get down and she'd be on her knees and she'd just go to sleep. People thought she was praying and she'd be down there sleeping. Yeah. Yeah. So they have a lot of holy days. I think there are about 200 holy days in the Coptic church. And so consequently, there are many, many days when you are at church for hours and hours. So, yeah. But when she came here to the United States, she became more involved in the church, in the Presbyterian church, actually. And that's where, I initially kind of came in.
So tell us about your dad then. What about your dad?
So my dad was, he was a Christian. He was in the Presbyterian church. She met him after she came here and was working. It's kind of an interesting thing. My mom, the time when she came here to the United States, it was during the reign of King Haile Selassie, which a lot of people may know him, may not know him, but he's kind of one of the more popular kings in at more recent times in Africa. Anyhow, and her parents had set money and things aside for them when they went away for college, and so that's how she was here. That was all provided for her. Well, there was a coup and they overthrew the king and seized everyone's assets and everything. And so she was here in the United States with her sister, and they were kind of cut off from everything. And so she had to decide to do a lot of things on their own that they did not know. And I admire her when I think about that. Just I can't imagine what that's like. But anyhow, she got a job and a restaurant, and my dad owned the restaurant.
Oh.
So that's how they met. They actually met that way. And the rest is kind of history. I guess I'm history. A few years later, they got married. A few years later, they had me. And so, and my brother. And so that's where we go from there. But he was a deacon in a church. But again, I felt, kind of like nominal relationship with God. And just more focused in on the activity of going to church, and made sure that we all went to church every single Sunday, and gave when the church asked for us to give to things, and we were very much involved in the life of the church. But the life of Christ was not really a part of our life at home.
So when did the life of Christ really sink into your heart?
Some years later, my parents unfortunately went through a divorce when I was probably about 9 or 10 years old. And at that time, we went to my mom's friend, a close Ethiopian friend of my mom. We spent some time with their family during that transition. And her husband would bring me to this church, bring their daughter and me and my brother to church. And it just felt so peaceful. I remember going there, and it was a place of just joy and peace and encouragement during a very tumultuous time in my childhood. And I remember just one day, there was an altar call and the main sanctuary, and I don't remember to this day what the pastor was preaching. I mean, I know he was giving the gospel clearly, but I remember responding to that, and this sweet woman, older woman, standing at the altar and praying the prayer of salvation with me. And it was a pivotal kind of moment when I realized that God was real, not just this kind of ethereal thing out there, that couldn't really be known. And it was the first time that him being a part of my life actually meant something to me, because I had seen things, growing up that did not seem like God would want my, dad doing this or other people doing that. And so I didn't really have that connection. But so that was my initial intro. But then, early teenage years, I kind of got away from that a little bit. And in my senior year in high school, a friend of mine invited me to come to youth group with him. And, I said, yeah, sure, why not? I thought it was odd. It was in the middle of the week, like who does that? I didn't know millions of people did that, but uh, so I said, yeah. And I went, and just, man, God just met me there in a very powerful way. I was able to, first of all, the service was not for another half hour to 45 minutes, and the fellowship hall outside of the teen room was already full of kids. Like, they were there super early because they loved being there. They loved being around each other, and they loved being in the service. And so then I sat through a teen service, where teens were actually leading in worship, and teens were praying, and teens were encouraging one another. And I was really shocked because I had attended a lot of churches, and I never saw it like that from teens doing that themselves with an honest relationship with God. And the Lord really got a hold of my heart, and that was really the day that I feel like I just fell in love with him. And I feel like I could never go back to anything else, any semblance of my life before that, after that moment. And funny segue, that's actually the same day that I met Chris.
I was gonna ask that. That's the
So
same day.
it's the same day. He was one of the kids in the youth group that was there. And so he was the friend that brought me to church. Chris was his best friend at church, and I was kind of one of his best friends at school. And so he just said, "Oh, hey, by the way, you know how I always mention my friend Chris? Here he is. This is him." Like,
And so
oh,
Chris was probably like, "That's the day you saw the light in more than one way."
yeah, yeah, he would probably say something like that. He's so funny, but God was gracious enough to give me a chance to kind of see him, but also I was really really focused on the Lord at that time and just trying to take in what was happening. Like I didn't, my life was so different before I walked in those doors, and I just saw, again, teens that were crying out to the Lord for themselves, and I had never experienced that before. And so, yeah, I had a little bit of space. We didn't start dating or anything right away. We just were kind of all youth group friends, and then that came down the road a little bit.
Yeah, wait, let me just do a side note here because I'm not sure I even mentioned that your husband's Chris Brooks. And so a lot of our listeners are Colson Fellows and, they're Colson Center fans. And so if they're Colson Center fans, they will know the name Chris Brooks. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that that's who we're talking to is his beautiful wife.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that was your senior year of high school, did you say?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
So take us, so you've met your husband that you don't know will be your husband one day. And now you're walking with the Lord. So what happened after high school? Where did the Lord lead you after that?
So, as it relates to, you mean as it relates to Chris, or as it relates
Well,
to, well,
your
we all
life in
kind of grew up
life in
together,
general,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So, we both, he was actually a freshman in college at the time. So I was a senior in high school. I was going into my senior year, and he was going into his second semester of freshman year of college. And yeah, and really, I mean, again, as I said, my everything kind of changed prior to that time when I came to Christ. Just because of a lot of the brokenness that I had experienced in my family and all of the challenges and things that we went through, I was like a lot of teenagers out there. I was just going to parties and things. I, had just language issues with how I would communicate with my friends, not using the right words for things. But I would do different things, partying, and I dated different guys and things like that. And all of a sudden, it's like none of that made any sense to me at all. And it's a funny thing because actually, God really prepared me before I went there. And the day when my friend invited me to come to church, it was almost like all of my friends had already graduated from high school the year before me. So all my friends were gone. I had just, for whatever reason, didn't feel like I wanted to date anybody anymore. So I stopped dating. Like, I just stopped. And then I heard somebody cursing one day, and I thought, oh my gosh, is that what I sound like? And I didn't want to do it anymore. So there were just these different things that happened where there was like God was like clearing house or something in my mind and in my heart, preparing me for that. I had no idea. It just felt very lonely to me. But when I came, he just rushed in and like filled in all those areas. So life for me after that was these friends who also had a heart for God and who taught me what that even meant, and friends I could call on to say to me, hey, let's pray for this or that, or I know you're going through this thing, I just wanted to check on you and see how you're doing and can I pray for you, um, those are just those things, those aspects of the Christian life, even how to have a Bible study. I didn't know any of those things, but I learned all of those from teens that were in our youth group that became my closest friends, many of whom I'm still friends with to this day.
That's so encouraging. I mean, I think sometimes we underestimate teenagers, right? because they can catch fire for the Lord just as quickly. And I just, that's encouraging to hear that. But okay, so you get married and 3 months later Chris becomes a pastor. I want to know, you know, I don't know how to ask this question, but I want, the gist of it is I want to know what it's like to be a pastor's wife of a large church like you guys were for so many years and still are, but just at a different place. But it was Evangel, right? Evangel Ministries, which was huge.
Hmm. Yeah, so we were actually the church that we met in was Evangel. And so that was the church that he kind of grew in ministry in a lot of ways. So he, preached his first sermon when he was 13 there and all of those kinds of things. So when we were in after youth group, when after high school, I went away to college. He went away to college. We kind of long distance dated in college, and then the beginning of his senior year, he proposed so that we would get married after he graduated. So that was kind of like the track. And he was running a Bible study, a very thriving Bible study in college at Michigan State University. And so I knew what I was getting into a little bit, at least, But the funny thing is that when you're like immersed in youth group, you actually don't even know that the rest of the church exists. Our youth group met in the lower level of our church, so we always joke that we were stuck in the basement. So when he became a pastor at the age of 20, when we were, he had just turned 21 actually. He became a youth pastor. It was really the first time that I was sitting in the adult congregation. And it was because I was now a pastor's wife, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't even welcome, right, exactly, welcome to what the adult life. And so it was really interesting. But one of the things that happened, which is really awesome, is I had ladies in the church who came alongside of me, who were older, who said, hey, I want to help you, figure out, how to invite people over to your house, how to host people, how to have, kids over to bake cookies and all those kinds of things, and like I didn't know what it meant necessarily to be a pastor's wife. I had seen it from a little bit of a distance. I saw my youth pastor's wife, I had seen our senior pastor's wife, but I didn't have like the deep relationships with them, so I wasn't fully aware. But I had these great women who came around me and helped me to be comfortable with who I was, first of all. That I feel like was a huge gift, a huge, huge gift that I received at an early stage in ministry, was the encouragement to be myself, that it was okay for me to not try to be like the last youth pastor's wife, or to be like this other person, or we wish this one did this, so now you should do it. And, that was a huge gift. And so I felt comfortable and I felt confident very early on in my role as Chris's wife, and as my role as a pastor's wife. But again, I think it was them lending their confidence to me until my confidence could, be built up. And so early on, that's really how it was. And his role in ministry just kind of grew and continued to grow over the years, until he was inevitably the senior pastor of the church. And it was a really special place, and it was a very it wasn't the largest church. I mean, we had at one point we had 3 campuses, and we had different things going on. So in some sense, it's larger than the average church in America, I know, but it wasn't necessarily a mega church. But more than that, we were very active in the lives of the people and in the community. So we had a lot of things that we were doing, a lot of conferences and events and retreats and Bible studies and different things that we were doing on a regular basis. And so now, skip ahead another 20 years or so into our most recent transition to our current church. And honestly, I will say the same thing happened. And it's just God's grace. I really believe it's His grace. I know that's not everybody's story, but for me, when I walked through the doors, I had women immediately come around me and say, we want you for you. We want you to be who God has called you to be and not feel the pressure to try to be someone else, and it's been a great journey over this last 2 years, and it has been a journey. We've gone through a lot of different things, but at every point, I have felt the tremendous love and support of our church. And even as you mentioned, our oldest son passed away. You mentioned our son in heaven. He actually passed away 3 months after we came to our new church. And so they just wrapped their arms around us like the best Holy Ghost hug ever. And God comforted us through our congregation, and just whether it was meals or calls or encouragement or help with our other kids, or whatever the case may be, granting time, for my husband. And it was wonderful. It really was. And I feel like God almost sped up like the bonding process with our new church through this very great, very deep pain and trial that we were going through with losing him. But being a pastor's wife has not again, like I said, is never anything I was surprised by. And even though it isn't the easiest, there's a lot of challenges. There are a lot of, nevertheless, there are a lot of expectations. Even though I had great people around me who were very encouraging all the way through, there's still a lot of expectations, and some of those I put on myself, um, and yeah, and so it's definitely humbling to be able to just stand beside your husband through all the ups and downs of ministry.
And people attack I mean, like, I just know Aaron and I have, our husbands are in ministry too. And being the wife, like standing with your husband, I think the hardest thing is when they're attacked. To just like, that's just tricky. And you probably get it way more being in a church setting.
Yeah. I that is definitely where I have probably struggled the most, and my husband is so gracious to try to protect me during those times, honestly, because I'm a mama bear. I'm definitely a mama bear, and so in those moments where I definitely have a strong sense of just justice in general, that there's right and there's wrong, and people should treat each other well. And so when Christians act out, it bothers me. And so when he's under attack, it's tough. It really is. But in this last 2 years, honestly, have really been difficult with that, because there's been so much to get pushed around about, and but it has caused me to lean on the Lord more than ever before, and it taught me what it means to really take our burdens to Him, to take our cares to Him, because obviously we've been kind of trained over the last 10 years that what you're supposed to do is jump on social media and act out when you're upset, and I've never really been that type of person to do that kind of thing. However, there's this unction to do something, to defend your spouse, or to, encourage them. And that really has been the biggest thing, is to know that no one can encourage him like I can. And those things that he would have been attacked for over the years, it's almost always it's lies. It's just the enemy really trying to discourage him. And we have to stay focused. We have to stay focused on God's plan and not allow him to get off track, and therefore I can't get off track either. And really just humble ourselves. That's the biggest thing. Humbling ourselves. I remember once at our previous church, our senior pastor there, he he invited all the married couples. He was praying for marriages. He had just done a sermon about marriage, and he invited all the couples up for this like huge altar call. And it's like, wow, okay. He said, I want all the couples to come, and I want to pray for your marriages. And it's like, wow, okay. So I'm a pastor's wife, and because that's how I thought. I was always involved in ministry behind the scenes. I just kind of wanted to pray for people. He's doing an altar call, the altar workers. I want to just pray for people. And my husband looked at me and said, okay, go ahead and you pray for those people there. And okay. And I was praying for them. And from the stage, over the microphone, our awesome pastor, he says, Yodit, I don't want you down there. I want you to go stand next to your husband. And I want to pray for you as well. And in that moment, I remember feeling my first thing was I was so embarrassed, like, oh my gosh, he just called me out in front of everyone. And then immediately the next thought was, God, if I have to be embarrassed to honor you, I will do it. I literally remember having that next thought. And I just said, okay, because I did what my husband asked me to do. He did ask me to go pray for them. And yet, and still, our pastor asked this other thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm not even gonna, I'm still gonna be obedient, and just honor God in this, because that was what would honor God in that moment. But I just remember having that moment of just saying, even if I'm embarrassed, then I'm gonna do it. And that was a huge breaking moment for me, from deciding I'm not going to just do what feels right in the moment, but I can do what God wants me to do and what is right, even if it doesn't go the way I thought it should go, or even if I end up embarrassed in the end. I'll never really be embarrassed if I followed what God had called me to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love so much of your story and all that you're saying, starting with how you started in ministry and those women who came around you. And I think even your ability to just say, I'm going to be obedient to God. And yeah, that was embarrassing, but that you were in a church, it sounds like that you felt like you were loved the way you were. And I just keep thinking about those women and how, that is exactly how the church ought to function. We often just hear horror stories or bad things that happen, in churches, and especially pastors' wives, pastors' kids. There's some grievances they have. Of course, some are legitimate, but I love hearing stories of the good and of those women who came around you in both different places. And that you guys, even though you're serving and you're in leadership of the church, you were being loved there, and that pastor's calling you out to say, "Hey, we need to pray for your marriage too." So I love that story. Okay, Yodi, there's so many things we want to talk to you about, but you mentioned your son, and you mentioned the past 2 years and how, for your family, the past 2 years have been especially trying, and lots of changes and grief and all of that. So I wonder if you would just let us into what the past 2 years have been like for you guys. I don't know if it started maybe with the church change and then the death of your son, or where you want to start with all that.
Well, it was, it started a little bit before. I guess the way that I just describe it, a little bit, I was telling Sarah about the hills and valleys, just how you can experience like great highs and lows kind of at the same time. And that just, to me, characterized those last 2 years probably the most. Um, when it came to our transitions, transitions are never easy, and I do thank God for the graces that He showed us in coming to our church, and but there were a lot of challenges that arose from our leaving our previous church, and those challenges weighed so heavily on me in that transition, as well as my husband. We definitely experienced what you mentioned earlier, just people saying hurtful things, people who misunderstood different things, and and unfortunately, it just was not a good situation that was there. We had left a fantastic, team, a fantastic transition plan, and unfortunately, it did not go the way that we all had expected and hoped that it would go. And so there, it left a lot of pain. It left a lot of people hurting in the wake of that. And so we carried that. I mean, that was our church, as we said. That's the church we met in and grew up in, and had our children, baptized and dedicated in, and so that was our family, as well. And when your family is hurting, it's really difficult. But at the same time, I'm also experiencing this wonderful open open arms of our current church, and just a tremendous outpouring of love. And then our son passed away, as I said, like 3 months later. And it was especially painful. Um, I mean, because I feel like in a lot of ways, it didn't, it's kind of one of those things where you're like, wow, it didn't have to happen, and he passed. So he actually died of pneumonia. Our son Chris came into our family when he was about 16, and my husband and I had we were no longer in youth ministry at the time, but he had come through kind of our church through our youth ministry, and just connected to us and latched on to us, and just found himself in a situation where he did not have a place to go anymore, and so we just opened our home to him and brought him into our family, even though we were only in our late 20s at the time. And so it's always fun when we get to talk about our ages. So he came into our home, about 17 or so. And I remember going to his parent teacher conferences in high school, and people are looking like, this is like your big sister. This isn't your mom, and having to kind of explain that dynamic. Well, anyhow, he was obviously older and on his own, and still facing a lot of different challenges, but he was just doing some really great things and with his life, and just got sick. He got sick and went to took a couple days off of work, from having a really bad cold. Couldn't he was a media specialist at a school, so he taught like reading to third through fifth graders, and ran the library and ran all of their like special standardized testing and everything for his schools. And yeah, he took a couple days off and went to the doctor, and they did not diagnose him as having pneumonia. And so they gave him some antibiotic or whatever. He felt a little bit better and thought he was going to go into work. And on the way there, his lungs were full of fluid, and he just he died instantly. And it was a really really hard thing to accept because of how that happened. And you're thinking, this did not have to happen. And as a mom, you're kind of feeling like, I wish I had been there, or I wish I had known he was even sick, because then I would have checked on him and all of those kinds of things. But nevertheless, we were able to just see the hand of God and the goodness of God even through it, and just different little moments where we realize, God, you're in control, and as much as this hurts and doesn't make natural sense to us. We know that somehow this was always a part of your plan, and that this is this can be used for your glory, somehow to be used for your glory. So let his life be a testament to your goodness, and your faithfulness. And so it was difficult. It was so difficult. It was very painful. Our kids really had a hard time, obviously. But we came through that, and we're still coming through that. We're still, some of our kids are really still struggling in certain ways, also from it right now. But, you know, again, God was with us every step of the way. And yeah, and so at the same time, again, good things would begin to happen, and God would make much of his life, and we would see people honoring even his life in different ways. There were so many different tributes. He did a lot of work throughout Metro Detroit with helping projects that helped to do gardens, like around urban gardens. He was involved in this urban garden initiative in Detroit. And so there were people who went and planted trees and parks and things in his honor, and he helped with revitalization of the communities, and so people made generous donations to organizations that he had served at, and scholarships, different things, so many different things happened. And that just blessed us, tremendously. And so we're grateful, I'm very grateful for what the Lord continues to make of his life. But I'm also grateful for every day that we had with him and what he did with his life when he was here. And it even challenges me to continue to make the most of every day, of life, while I'm here.
One thing in a conversation that you and I had, one thing that you kept saying really struck me. You were talking about the last 2 years, and you said that it's really felt like a new normal hasn't really sunk in yet, because the transition and leaving that community that you had been with for so long, and then of course the death of your son, which is huge. But one thing you said was, I'm figuring out how to live faithfully in each day, not waiting for the new normal to sink in, but just, this is the day that God has given me. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that. I think that's really powerful.
And I think that's something that all of us, have in some way or another have settled into some kind of mindset about the world right now. Yeah, so obviously coming through that, the loss of our son and all that, and then we were so excited about 2020 when 2020 was coming, and just some momentum that we were starting to finally pick up and build, and then COVID, just and COVID, and then not only COVID, but then you have racial tensions, and then you have political tensions, and then we have mask or no mask, and all of these other things
And
that
so many
just,
really strong opinions about things that
yeah,
you're like, people, calm
yeah,
down.
exactly. And all of us, it's so funny. Sports can be like really intense, right? And you can see people are armchair quarterbacks, and they just get so intense about like the game and everything else. I feel like we've become like, armchair, social media, critics and pundits and stuff. It's like we don't even leave it to the guys on TV anymore. We just have our own vitriol to get out there. And so it's been intense, like you said, people are very angry or about different things, or they have been, I should say. And so that was, it was a lot. And so one way I kind of look at it is like you're standing in like the ocean, and the waves are coming, and there's like the ebbs and flows that happen, and you say to yourself, okay, eventually it'll calm down, but the ocean never really does calm down, it just, the tide might come in or out, and it kind of feels like that a little bit, but the new normal in some ways might be ebbs and flows. And so I think I got a little bit exhausted of waiting for that new normal, because every time I thought it was here, it would morph into something else. And I said, you know what? This is it. Like you said, this is the day the Lord has made. I'll rejoice and I'm going to be glad in it. And I'm going to take today for what it is. And I'm going to plan for tomorrow. And I'm going to plan for, next year or the year after. Because I think many of us have stopped doing that. We've stopped making even, long term plans, planning 6 months out or a year out, because we're afraid of what's going to happen in the world. But the reality is that we've learned that we will adapt. We'll just adapt to the change. Whatever new comes, okay, great. We'll shift our plans, we'll cancel, we'll move some things. But we have to have to keep moving ahead, because if you don't, then you stifle hope, and hope deferred makes the heart sick, and I think that when we look at it from that perspective, I mean, the reality is people have, struggled with mental illness and all these different things in ways that we have never, in numbers that we have never seen before, And I think a big part of that is because there has been this sense that hope is not attainable. Hope is out there too far away, and will hope ever really come, and we know who our hope is in, and we can trust God, and God is provided. He's been faithful, and we don't have to be afraid to hope. And that, I think that's really what it is. I don't want to be afraid to hope anymore, because even if I put my hope in an expectation that something will happen, it may or may not. That's fine. I'm okay with that. But I don't want to be afraid to continue to hope. And so we make plans, and we continue to. I think it's in Nehemiah, where it's like, build your communities and marry
Yeah.
your children and
Plant
do all,
gardens.
plant gardens and do all of the things of life, and that was where I had stopped living. I had stopped doing all of those things, and enough was enough.
So, Yodit, how did you? Okay, so during these kind of darker times, of course, when you lost your son, and then you've changed churches, you're looking forward to 2020, and then 2020 was a disaster in so many ways for our culture and in the church, and so I have a couple questions for you. But one, I was just thinking, what, as you were grieving and as you were helping your church to navigate COVID and then the racial tensions and all those things. During those times, what were some of the ways that people loved you well? I'm just thinking about how we have people in our lives that we see are going through difficult things, and sometimes we're just left unsure of how to love well. And so as you walk through those times, can you think about what were some of the things that people did, or maybe even mention some of the things that were like, actually, this was really painful when people did this, or, either one, but just hearing about your church body, I'm assuming there were ways that people did love you well. I'm even thinking about, because we know you've adopted 3 of your kids, and so when you brought these new children into your home, how did people love you well during that struggle too, and just change? But any thoughts you have on that, I would just love to hear.
So that's two really really amazing times of our lives. When we brought our kids home, it's funny. People had different responses to each one. As I mentioned, Chris, he was a teenager, and some people were kind of like, "What are you doing?" Like this.
Because you were only like 4 years older than him, right?
I know. Well, we're like at 10 years, yeah. So we're like 26, and he's like
Oh, okay.
16.
Got it.
So it's like, what are you doing? And so that was kind of interesting. But again, we really felt very deeply and clearly that God wanted us to do that. So it didn't matter what people felt about it. But then we adopted our daughter Zoe from Ethiopia. And as I mentioned, my mom is Ethiopian. And, I've always had a heart for adoption. I just want to say, because um, I remember several times throughout my childhood where I came into contact with the idea and concept of adoption and the reality that there were children who didn't have families. And I had settled in my heart when I was a kid that I wanted to adopt children. I had a friend in foster care that I was so sad every time the teacher would give her a post-it note with the new person who was going to come pick her up from school because she was being moved again. And I would try to get my mom to adopt her. And she's like, honey, it doesn't work like that. It's not that easy. I said, okay, I'll solve the world's problems. I'll adopt all the kids when when I'm an adult. And so I kind of had that in my heart. And so I didn't expect people's attitudes that I got when we did like I said, with our son. I could kind of understand in some ways why people, weren't understanding that. But as a teenager, but when I adopted our daughter from Ethiopia, I was really shocked by the number of people who felt it was strange and questioned why we would go to another country to adopt a child as opposed to around the corner because there were kids in foster care, here. And so that was an interesting pushback. And then our third child, our son Cameron, we adopted through foster care here. But he's biracial, and we had questions about that too. Like, well, why would you do that? And I got tired of people, early on, and I said, okay, you're never gonna please people, no matter what. My mom used to always say that people will never be fully happy with you. And so I just decided, that was when we decided we wanted to be more vocal about our advocacy for adoption because people got hung up on details that didn't matter when it came to this very real problem of children not having forever families, and it was, let's stop with all of the excuses, brass tacks. There are kids who need families. You have an extra seat at your table. You should do something about it, and as much as you can. And so we started that, and really, that was really an important part of our ministry for many years. But when it came to what how people loved on us, I think there were a lot of people who did love on us. So there were people who said crazy things, but there were a lot of people who loved on us. They, gave us baby showers that were like amazing, and all these different things, different ways to let us know that they loved us and were, blessed by what we were doing, and encouraged us. But when it came to this pandemic, one of the things that happened is we just jumped right in there, all hands on deck as a church. And so one of the things that we did one of the things I really wanted to make sure is that our pastors' wives, particularly of our campuses, because it's really difficult to reach everybody personally, right? And so I wanted to connect with the women who were helping to lead out at each of our campuses. And so we started having regular Zoom calls to check in with each other, to laugh, to, have devotions, to pray together. And that really was a very important link for us, a very important way to show love to each other. I even remember early on how there was like a toilet paper watch, it's like, have enough toilet paper, and who needs it? And we actually had people who were running out, and we'd do like porch drop offs, of toilet paper. And so just checking in, one of the things that I think we all realized was the power of just contacting each other, calling, sending a text, and dropping off food. We would have mystery drop offs of Chick-fil-A. We'd get like a knock at the door, and Chick-fil-A would be on our porch, and we were so excited. Our kids love that. So People would love on, each other in all these different ways. And so that was, in some ways, that's one of the things I do miss about 2020, about that pandemic, was the fact that we did have much more open hearts at that time, and everyone was looking to serve one another. And so that was, yeah, that was really special. One of the other things that we did as a church was decide to serve our community and really try to help boost even our local restaurants and everything. We did like Takeout Tuesday, where we would just buy food for like the whole staff of like a hospital wing, like their intensive care unit wings and all these different things, just to encourage them. But also, we would buy the food from restaurants that were struggling to stay open. So, it's just, I think the biggest thing, a friend of mine, I love her to pieces. One of the best things that she's ever taught me was what she calls the ministry of presence, just being there. And she would say, sometimes I don't have the money to fix the problem, or I don't have all the time in the world. I wish I could sit with someone for 8 hours, but I can just come and hug them and, carve out that, even if it's only 20 minutes, to just say, you are important enough for me to be here, to show up, to come hug you, and maybe bring you a Starbucks or something, and then head out. And I think that was one of the big things that we did. And that's one of the ways that people totally loved on us as well during that time.
I know 2020 did. I mean, there was a lot of things that were bad, but there was also just this whole people's imaginations were sparked. Oh, how can I do this and still be in the regulations? And so a lot of creativity happened in 2020. I love that. Man, my kids would pack up and move to be your neighbors if they found out that somebody brought you Chick-fil-A and just dropped it on your porch.
Yes,
It's so funny.
yes. That was the best.
Well, that ministry of presence, I think, is a good word for us to all think about, because as I say, yeah, sometimes you see things going on in your community or with friends, and you can feel at a loss of what to do or what to say. And I actually like that you started with, people gave a lot of opinions. And I just, you shake your head, but we also can relate to feeling like, well, you see things happening and you want to say something, but it is a good word to just, we can be a presence without giving our opinion, without, saying, why would you adopt a teenager? Why would you do that? Instead of just, hey, can I help? Does he need some new sweatshirts? Can I help give a Target gift card? Just instead of always feeling like we have to say something, just being with people can be a huge ministry. We don't, because oftentimes we think, well, I'm not sure what to say. Well, maybe it's better not to say a lot. Maybe it's better to listen, but definitely not to leave people. And I know your family and your church and all the ministries you guys are involved in are so community minded. And it sounds like your oldest son picked up that lesson, even coming to your family later on, in his teenage years. But how do you nurture that in your kids and your community, just to be like you nurtured that in your son? He was outward looking. He was community minded. He was serving and teaching kids to read and being a part of the garden and things like that. How have you nurtured that? And was it something that you grew up with? And Chris too. Like, was it something that you guys just automatically did, or how have you grown in that?
We have been blessed to have a family that has has a heart for serving. My brother is he's the CEO of a community development organization here that does, so many things to empower families in Detroit. my brother-in-law, Chris's brother, the same thing. He's been helping families and working with communities around Detroit for the last 15 years, just doing so many different things to help families. And even my mother-in-law, she ran a feeding program, to help families to have food, and even when she realized people didn't know that you would give them these boxes of food and then you would visit them and those boxes were still sitting there, she says, "Oh, they don't know how to make meals with this." She taught them how to cook. So I we just have had a family that has had a heart to serve other people. But I will say, you don't get it just by being around only. So we do try to be a little bit more intentional, with our kids that are with us now. They One of the things though is just really learning how to serve each other. We're trying to teach them how to see other people. Our daughter just came back from a mission trip with our church where her team was serving at a special needs home, where they were helping adults with special needs, and I feel like that cultivates something in her heart, for that. And so if we don't give them opportunities to have their heart pricked for other people, then they probably won't, you know. We have a very me-centered culture, more than what any of us grew up with and can even really imagine. Like every day, I mean, I forget what the number is, like how many, 1,000 some odd times a day we're touching our phones and like, looking at, what's next or who's liking me or who's not liking me. And so I think we really just have to give them the opportunity to see other people, and therefore they can have their heart pricked for other people, and God is able to use that. And to one of the things I've always loved is that sentiment that God sees me. He sees me where I am. He sees me in my weakness. He sees me in my challenge. And even those people who we would say are out there from us, He sees them too. And when we get to be the hands and feet of Christ, then we're reminders that He sees them. And so that's the biggest thing, I think, giving our kids exposure to opportunities to see other people is and to serve them, to see them and to serve them. And that doesn't even necessarily mean that it has to be someone who's like, poor or in, less, affluent circumstance or whatever. It could be our neighbor. We had someone who just asked me the other day, her neighbor's husband unfortunately committed suicide, and asked, like, I don't even know them. Like, what am I supposed to do? I'm like, just go to their house and say, hey, I live 2 doors down and I just want you to know I'm here, and let them know you're praying for them. Let them know that you see them and that God sees them, in that moment. And that is the best thing, one of the best things that we can do to cultivate that, live that out in front of our kids. I think that's one of the best ways to do that.
Yeah. That leads well into our next question, because you're kind of framing up some advice about like developing eyes to see the world around you, and then to serve where you can. But what other advice would you have? We have a lot of young listeners. What advice would you have for young girls, like high school age, college, early college kind of thing?
Mm. Well, one of the things that I would definitely say is to find women who are older than you and further down the road than you that you will choose to trust. That was a big theme for me over the last 2 years throughout all of the things that we were going through, was to choose to trust. We can a lot of times feel, oh, I don't know them, or I'm vulnerable, or I don't know what they're going to think. But sometimes God puts people in our lives and says, just choose to trust this person. and I will move through this relationship. I would say to young women, find one or two women that are further down the road ahead of you, 10 years older than you at least, that you can choose to trust, so that you can learn. That's one of the things that's really difficult now, is to feel comfortable learning from other people, so that's one thing. And choose your friends wisely. That's another thing too, because oftentimes we go in the direction of a herd, and the herd might be going somewhere where we don't really want to go, but we've already feel like our choice of friends is static. We can't do anything about it. And the reality is, no, you can do something about it. It's not too late to change your friends, and to choose a different set of friends, because we really do go in the direction that our friends go oftentimes. And so you need to look at those, at those kinds of things, and go that way. But yeah, I think those are some big things. But also, the third thing I would probably say is, don't be afraid to live life, because it could be confused in trying to live a life for Christ, and to be focused in on your purpose and things, that means that you're not able to do things that are fun, or that are, great experiences. And I love to travel. I've always loved to travel. And I tell kids, if you want to go on a, exchange trip, or you want to travel to another country, don't be afraid to do that, but do those things before your life becomes more complicated, So as you get older, life gets a little bit more complex, and it's not so easy to do. And so that's the thing. Don't be afraid, to live life, and choose to trust. Have a few people who you can choose to trust, and choose your friends wisely, because that will come back to either encourage you or pull you back.
That's great advice. Okay, we love to talk about books on the podcast, and I'm going to open it up to you and say you can answer in a couple different ways. Okay, you can answer and say, tell us what you're reading right now. What books are you reading that you love? Or, I mean, we've covered kind of a lot of topics, but especially this community minded. We've talked about grief. We've talked about all kinds of things. So there might be a book that you would want to recommend to our listeners in that sort of thing. So it's up to you, Yodit. You can choose what you want to tell us, or you can tell us all of those books too, but whatever you want, you decide.
Okay. So, a book that I'm reading, or finishing, I should say, at this point. Oh, well, let me say this really quickly. So, as you said, Aaron, we've got a lot of kids with a lot of age range between us, right? And it isn't always, I want to give a disclaimer. It's not easy for me to make time to read. So, I want to say that. I had a young mom the other day say, "What? You can read? You make time to read? How do you do that?" And so I kind of had to come up with a little system to help me to be able to read, when I wanted to. And
Tell us about that system.
okay, all right. And so I just call it dynamic immersive reading. It's not cheap, because what I end up doing is I buy the book, and then I buy the book on audiobook. And so what I do is I do them both at the same time, so that I am reading the book, but the audiobook is keeping me on pace, so that I'm not rereading or forgetting what did it just say, or dozing. You know how your mind just floats when you're reading and you're hearing the kids in the other room doing something. I find it keeps me on track. I also do that even with Bible reading, when I want to read like a whole book, or something, where I'll just listen and read and take notes all at the same time. So that's just a little nugget. But
and wait, is it soundproof? Soundproof headphones, and you're like,
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
That's the next level.
See,
the sound
you're welcome. You're welcome for that idea.
Thank you. I appreciate it. But honestly, it's the only way that I really get to read most of the time. But one of the books that I have loved and have done, that same way was a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. That
Oh,
book,
yes. Yeah.
John Mark Comer was phenomenal. I'm just finishing that one. Another one that I'll give that I absolutely love. We were talking about loving well. And in this season, I have three daughters and three sons. And so, but my oldest daughter, um, I've only got her a couple more years before she goes away to college and all these things. And so I've been really focusing more on how to impact my daughter, my oldest daughter, and a fantastic book by Carrie Kompakis, which is Love Her Well. And it is just a book that just talks about encouraging how to encourage moms through the challenges that our teenage daughters are going through and how to really see through some of those challenges to your daughter's heart and to never lose sight of your daughter's heart in the midst of those things. And so she's just fantastically practical, which I absolutely love. And she gives a lot of really good wisdom. So I would commend that book to any mom of daughters, whether they're teens now, 20 somethings, or even if they're younger. That is a book I would really recommend. So, but The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry has been so helpful because we really do too much. We do too much, and we have to really work really hard to not let that overtake us. And so I'm working on that. And we got a lot of people around us. We're all reading this book to try to slow down. So
Yeah, it's good. Especially with COVID putting a pause on everything and then starting back up again. I feel like, whoa, there's so much to do when there's like two things in the day. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need a nap. But I'm getting used to that. So maybe I should read that and keep the slow pace. But okay, our last question is, if you could have coffee with any woman from history, who would it be?
honestly, I know this. I hadn't even expected myself to say this answer, but my grandmothers.
Oh,
I would
yeah.
have coffee with my grandmothers. I think that would be just amazing. My mom lost her parents when she was really young, so I didn't get to meet that grandmother, and her grandmother was 115 when she died. And
Wow.
yeah, and
That's
she
old.
she died like a few years before I was born. And so, and then my dad's mom, she passed away. I remember her. I do remember her, but I was probably like 8 or 9 when she died.
Mm-hmm.
And so these women lived like such interesting lives,
Mm-hmm.
and those lives are a part of who I am. I would love to have a chance to sit down with coffee and just get to know them and
Yeah.
to hear what life was like for them and what they wanted for us, even,
Right.
in the future. So that would
Oh, I
be.
love that answer. Okay, I just have to ask, have you been able to go back to Ethiopia where your mom was from, where your grandmother lived, and have you gotten to experience any of that?
Oh, I have, and I'm so grateful for it. I have. My mom took me back when I was 13, and she
Okay.
took me there, I should say. I was born here, but she took me there when I was 13, which was amazing. And then when my husband and I adopted our daughter, we went back some years later, and that was in 2006. And then in 2018, I got an opportunity to go back also with a organization that I was doing some orphan care ministry with, and so it's just wonderful chance to get to do that, and I'm grateful. It's a beautiful country, it really is, and the people are absolutely amazing. So that was awesome.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Yes, thank you for having me. This has been really fun. I have enjoyed it. I probably have to go back and hear what did I say.
Yes.
Because it was just it's so cool to just get to talk with you all, and I appreciate so much the ministry that you have and with strong women, and really sharing the lives of so many people. I have learned a lot listening to your podcast, and I'm grateful. Different issues I wasn't aware of, and people who are just amazing women and young women as well. So I want to thank you, Sarah and Aaron, for what you're doing, and thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. That's encouraging.
Thanks, Yodi.